For 7 years, we lived in perfect anonymity within the manicured borders of Oakwood Estates. The kind of community where lawn height is measured with rulers and garbage cans must disappear from the curb within 4 hours of collection. I never minded the rules. They were the price of pristine streets and well-maintained common areas. My wife, Claire, minded even less. She preferred to remain invisible, tending to her roses and vegetable garden while the neighborhood politics swirled around us but never through us. "The less attention we draw, the better," she would say, sipping her herbal tea on our porch swing each evening. I never questioned why she valued privacy so fiercely. There was a stillness to her that I respected, something earned, not born. Our homeowners association had always been strict but reasonable. Monthly meetings, annual dues, seasonal inspections, the standard bureaucracy of suburban life. President Thomas had run the board for a decade with a business-like efficiency. Not friendly, but fair. That all changed the day he announced his retirement. "I am stepping down for health reasons," he explained at the final meeting he presided over. "The board has elected Gerald Hoffman as my replacement." Gerald Hoffman stood and straightened his tie, a man in his 60s with the eager smile of someone who finally had power he had craved his entire life. I felt a shift in the room, an anticipatory tension. Claire squeezed my hand under the table. She always sensed danger before it announced itself. Within weeks, everything changed. New bylaws appeared in our mailboxes overnight. Inspection frequencies doubled. Fines tripled. But most concerning were the new HOA enforcement officers who began patrolling in pairs, wearing matching black polos with embroidered badges and utility belts laden with measuring tools and body cameras. They walked with the swagger of authority, but without the training or restraint. "They are watching our house," Claire mentioned one evening, her voice calm as she watered her tomato plants. I followed her gaze to see two men in those black polos standing across the street, making notes on tablets while photographing our property. "Probably just the regular inspection," I said, though I knew it was the third inspection that week. Claire nodded but said nothing more. That was her way, economical with words, generous with observation. I worked from home most days, but Tuesdays and Thursdays took me into the city for client meetings. It was on those days that the enforcement officers began their more aggressive approach. Neighbors later told me they would wait until my car left the driveway before appearing at our front door with clipboards and cameras. Claire never mentioned these visits, not once, but I noticed small changes. She began wearing a sun hat that shadowed her face. She installed a small camera beneath the porch light. She moved her gardening sessions to different times of day, unpredictable and brief. These were not the actions of someone afraid, but someone preparing. I arrived home earlier than usual one Thursday afternoon to find our front door ajar. Inside, Claire sat at our dining table, her hands folded neatly before her. She was staring at the garden through the window with such intensity that she did not hear me enter. "Claire," I called softly. She turned to me and something in her expression made my skin tighten. Her face was composed, serene even, but her eyes held a cold calculation I had never witnessed before. Not anger, not fear, something far more dangerous, decision. "They came into the house today," she said, her voice steady. "They claimed they needed to inspect for water damage that might affect the community plumbing lines." I set down my bag with deliberate care, trying to control the rage building in my chest. They entered without permission. They had a paper, something about emergency access provisions in the HOA agreement. She tilted her head slightly. "I allowed it this time." The way she said those last two words sent a chill down my spine. There was history in her voice, a past she rarely referenced, but that shaped every careful move she made. I had always known my wife came from a professional background she did not discuss, something government-adjacent that required security clearances and non-disclosure agreements. I respected her privacy enough never to pry. But watching her now, cataloging the garden she had meticulously built with the detached analysis of a tactician, I realized the HOA had awakened something in her, something that had been dormant but never truly gone. The morning began with yet another violation notice slipped under our door. This one claimed our garden hose was an improper shade of green that violated neighborhood aesthetic standards. It was the 14th notice in 10 days. Each carried a fine of $150. Each required immediate correction. Each seemed designed specifically to provoke us. "They are testing boundaries," Claire observed, reading the notice without emotion. "Establishing dominance through constant pressure." I slammed my coffee mug down harder than intended. "This is extortion. We need to fight this legally." Claire set the paper down and looked at me with those calm eyes that always seemed to see more than others. "Yes," she agreed. "We will, but first we need to understand what we are truly fighting." That afternoon, I had another city meeting. I kissed Claire goodbye, watching as she settled onto the porch with her gardening gloves and pruning shears. Something made me hesitate at the car door. "Call me if anything happens," I said. She nodded and returned to her roses. I drove away with an uneasiness I could not name. My meeting ended early, a stroke of timing that would change everything. As I turned onto our street, I saw them immediately, two enforcers standing on our porch, looming over Claire. One had his hand wrapped around her upper arm. The other was filming with a body camera. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in her posture. I parked haphazardly and ran toward the house. As I got closer, I heard fragments of their confrontation. "You need to produce identification now," one man demanded. "This is an HGA-registered property under investigation." "This is my home," Claire replied, her voice quiet but firm. "And you are trespassing." The larger enforcer tightened his grip on her arm. "Without proper identification, you are the trespasser, ma'am." I was halfway up the lawn when I saw it happen. The enforcer shoved Claire backward toward the door. Not hard enough to injure, but with clear intent to intimidate. Something flashed across her face, a micro-expression so brief I might have imagined it. But in that instant, I saw her catalog his weak points with clinical precision. "That was your mistake," she said, so softly I barely heard it. I reached the porch steps shouting, "Get your hands off my wife! What do you think you are doing?" The enforcers turned toward me, startled but quickly composing themselves into bureaucratic smugness. "Sir, we are conducting an authorized inspection, and this woman is being uncooperative," the one with the camera stated. "This woman is my wife, and you are assaulting her on our property." I pulled out my phone. "I am calling the police." "Go ahead," the larger one smirked. "We have authority under HOA Bylaw 47B to inspect and secure the premises against code violators." I dialed anyway, my hands shaking with rage. Claire stood perfectly still, watching the enforcers with the calculated patience of a predator, not fearful, noting weaknesses. The call connected, and I reported the situation. The dispatcher sounded bored. 20 minutes later, a patrol car finally arrived. The officer listened to both sides, then delivered the verdict that left me speechless. "This is a civil matter between homeowners and their association," he explained. barely concealing his annoyance at being called. If you have complaints about HOA procedures, take it up with the board or get a lawyer. The enforcers smirked behind him, already turning to leave with the confidence of men who knew the system was on their side. You will be receiving additional fines for filing a false police report, one called over his shoulder. After they left, Claire went inside without a word. I found her in the kitchen, preparing tea with steady hands that betrayed no emotion. They cannot do this, I insisted. It is illegal, it is harassment. She nodded slightly. Yes, it is. She set the teacup down untouched. Excuse me for a moment. That night, Claire disappeared into the garage, a space she had never shown interest in before. I heard unfamiliar sounds, metal against metal, drawers opening, tools being sorted. Hours passed. When I finally checked on her, I found her seated at my workbench, surrounded by disassembled electronics. Components I did not recognize were neatly arranged before her. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she connected wires too tiny for my eyes to follow. "Claire," I asked hesitantly, "what is happening?" She looked up at me, and her eyes held a clarity that sent a chill down my spine. "They have crossed a line," she said simply. "Now I need to remember who I was." That night, we sat facing each other across our kitchen table. Outside, the street was quiet except for the occasional sweep of headlights from an HOA patrol car passing slowly by our house. Claire folded her hands in front of her, a gesture so familiar yet suddenly foreign in its precision. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about who I was before we met." I had always respected the boundaries of her past. When we married 8 years ago, I knew only the broad strokes: government work, security clearance, early retirement. The details remained in shadow, and I had been content to leave them there. "You do not have to explain," I assured her. "Yes," she corrected me gently. "I do, because what happens next requires your understanding." She began speaking in that measured way of hers, each word carefully chosen. For 15 years, she explained, she had worked in intelligence, not as an analyst behind a desk, as I had assumed, but in the field. Deep cover operations across 3 continents. Specialized training in counterintelligence, infiltration, and dismantling corrupted power structures from within. "I was good at becoming invisible," she explained, "at seeing systems and their weaknesses, at patience." The woman who tended roses and sipped tea on our porch had once orchestrated the collapse of a human trafficking network in Eastern Europe, had spent 2 years undercover in a corrupt government ministry, had skills I could not begin to comprehend. "Why did you leave?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Burnout, moral injury, the usual reasons," she said, but her eyes told me there was more she would never share. "I chose this life, quiet, anonymous, peaceful, very deliberately." She stood and gestured for me to follow her. We climbed the narrow stairs to our attic, a space I rarely visited. The air was thick with dust and the sweet smell of the cedar panels Claire had insisted on installing when we moved in. She moved to the far corner, shifted aside old holiday decorations, and revealed a footlocker I had never noticed before. "It has a false bottom," she explained, entering a combination into a lock hidden beneath a loose metal plate. The bottom of the trunk lifted up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay the artifacts of her former life, passports with her photo but different names, specialized communication devices, a collection of credential badges for agencies and organizations I recognized only from news headlines, small hard drives sealed in protective cases, a slim binder containing documents in multiple languages. "I locked this away when we married," she said, lifting out a small metal case. I promised myself I would never open it again. She opened the case to reveal specialized surveillance equipment, more advanced than anything commercially available. But now I have no choice, she continued, her voice hardening slightly. My safety has been compromised, our home has been invaded, the normal channels of resolution have failed. I stared at the contents of the footlocker, trying to reconcile this evidence with the woman I thought I knew. What are you planning to do? Information gathering first, she said, already sorting through the equipment with practiced hands. These people are bullies using bureaucracy as a weapon, but every system has its weak points. Every corruption leaves a paper trail. She looked up at me, her eyes clearer and more focused than I had ever seen them. I am not going to harm anyone, but I am going to expose exactly what this HOA has become. I helped her carry selected items down to the spare bedroom. As she began setting up what looked like a miniature intelligence center, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. Were you ever going to tell me about all of this? She paused, considering the question with her characteristic thoroughness. I hoped I would never need to, she admitted. That part of my life was over. I chose you this house, these roses, because they were real, uncomplicated. She connected a device to what appeared to be a portable server. But I always knew that if danger found us, I would not hesitate to use every skill I have to protect what matters. She turned to me, her expression softening slightly. I am still the same person you married, just with a more complicated resume than you realized. For the first time since this began, I smiled. So what now? Now, she said, her focus returning to the equipment, I am going to collect intelligence, my way. Our home transformed overnight. The spare bedroom became what Claire called the operations center, though to casual observation it would appear to be nothing more than a home office. Specialized equipment was disguised as ordinary household objects. Monitoring devices resembled phone chargers. Surveillance cameras looked like smoke detectors. First rule of intelligence gathering, Claire explained as she worked, is to become invisible through ordinary appearance. She moved through the neighborhood with a new purpose, though to others she would appear unchanged. The quiet gardener, the polite neighbor who kept to herself. But now every interaction was calculated, every conversation a potential source of information. Claire began by mapping the HOA power structure. Board members, committees, external contractors. She created detailed profiles of each person involved, identifying their roles, relationships, and potential pressure points. Gerald Hoffman, she murmured one night, reviewing her notes. Former middle manager at a pharmaceutical company, no actual property management experience, but somehow controls millions in HOA funds with minimal oversight. She attended every public meeting, sitting quietly in the back, observing dynamics and alliances. During one such gathering, she excused herself to use the restroom, but instead planted tiny audio devices in strategic locations throughout the clubhouse. These will activate only during meetings, she explained later. Low power consumption, encrypted transmission to our secure server, undetectable by standard sweeps. Within days, we had hours of recorded conversations that painted a disturbing picture. The HOA leadership was systematically embezzling community funds through inflated maintenance contracts with shell companies they themselves controlled. Inspection fines were not being recorded in official ledgers, but instead diverted to private accounts. Listen to this, Claire said one evening, playing a recording of Gerald Hoffman speaking to another board member. The Mueller audit is coming up, his voice crackled through the speaker. Make sure those violation fees go through the secondary account, and get the enforcers to hit the east side hard this week. We need another 20,000 to cover the discrepancy. While I processed the implications of this corruption, Claire was already moving to the next phase. She created false HOA violation notices, identical to the official ones but sent to board members themselves. The resulting confusion during their next meeting was evident in the recordings. "Who authorized these fines against me?" Gerald demanded. "I never approved this." "Perhaps you should check your roses for unauthorized cultivars," another board member snapped back, clearly agitated. Claire also discovered that the enforcers were not security professionals at all. Using techniques she would not explain to me, she accessed their employment records. They were primarily ex-military with problematic discharge records, hired through generic job postings on Craigslist. They had no training in property management, conflict resolution, or community engagement. They were simply men willing to intimidate neighbors for $15 an hour. Her most significant discovery came when she managed to access the HOA's digital records. The most recent board election, the one that had installed Gerald Hoffman as president, showed clear evidence of manipulation. Ballot counts did not match registered voters. Several residents who supposedly voted were traveling abroad during the election period. "He lost by 67 votes, Claire noted, reviewing the actual tallies, but reported winning by 42. One evening, I returned home to find Claire watching footage from a hidden camera she had placed near the clubhouse. The video showed Gerald and two enforcers confronting an elderly veteran who had placed a small American flag next to his mailbox. Technically, a violation of HOA rules about unauthorized displays. When the older man refused to remove it, Gerald grabbed his arm. The veteran pulled away, and Gerald slapped him hard across the face. The enforcers did not intervene. They simply documented the non-compliance. "They are getting bolder," Claire observed, escalating the intimidation. She worked methodically, gathering evidence and creating carefully engineered chaos within the HOA operations. She rerouted their complaint hotline to a closed pizza restaurant. She sent conflicting instructions to maintenance crews. She fabricated inspection reports that contradicted official findings. "I am not just collecting evidence," she explained. "I am forcing them to make mistakes. When people panic, they get sloppy." Each morning, she would brew her tea and sit on the porch as always. To our neighbors, nothing had changed. But as I watched her calmly pruning her roses while surveillance operations ran in our spare bedroom, I realized I was witnessing a side of my wife I had never seen before. Focused, methodical, and absolutely relentless. "How long will this take?" I asked one night. She considered the question carefully. "As long as necessary, but not a day longer." We knew the counterattack was coming. Claire had predicted it down to the day. "They will notice the disruption soon," she had warned. "When systems of corruption begin to fail, they do not collapse immediately. They lash out." The first sign came in the form of an emergency HOA meeting notice, hand-delivered to every home except ours. A neighbor sympathetic to our situation brought us her copy. The agenda listed a single item: security threats within the community. Claire attended anyway, slipping in quietly after the meeting had started. She returned 2 hours later, her expression unchanged but her posture slightly more rigid. "They have declared war," she said simply. "Gerald claimed there are domestic terrorists targeting the HOA. He mentioned our address specifically as a property of concern. The next morning, Gerald Hoffman himself appeared on our front lawn, accompanied by 4 enforcers and a small crowd of neighbors. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mr. Wilson," Gerald announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The board has determined that your continued violations represent a clear and present danger to community standards." He thrust a document toward me. "This is a notice of intent to revoke your property rights under HOA Covenant Section 118. See, you have 30 days to come into compliance or face removal." Removal, as if we were a diseased tree rather than homeowners with legal rights. I took the paper without comment, aware that several neighbors were filming the interaction on their phones. "Your wife has been observed engaging in suspicious behavior," Gerald continued, clearly performing for his audience. "Trespassing on community property, tampering with official notices, harassing board members." Claire appeared beside me, teacup in hand, the very picture of suburban calm. She said nothing, which seemed to unnerve Gerald more than any protest would have. "We have filed a formal complaint with local authorities," he added, taking a step back. "This neighborhood deserves to feel safe." After they left, the true campaign began. Flyers appeared in mailboxes throughout the community. "Alert! Unstable elements among us," with a poorly disguised photo of our house. The HOA newsletter featured an article about handling behavioral health crises in suburban settings, with thinly veiled references to our situation. Most disturbing was the local news segment that aired the following week. A reporter stood on the street near our home, carefully angling the shot to show our roof in the background. "Homeowners associations across the country are facing new challenges in maintaining community standards," she intoned seriously. "Here in Oakwood Estates, board members report escalating tensions with residents who refuse to comply with safety regulations." The camera cut to Gerald, looking appropriately concerned in a suit and tie. "We have always prioritized the well-being of our community," he claimed. "But when individuals begin to systematically undermine the very foundations of neighborhood security, we must take action." The reporter nodded gravely. "Sources close to the situation describe erratic behavior, possible surveillance of board members, and a history of confrontation that has left many residents feeling unsafe." Not a single resident had been interviewed for an opposing viewpoint. Not a single fact had been verified. The social isolation was immediate and nearly complete. Neighbors crossed the street rather than walk past our house. Invitations to community events mysteriously stopped arriving. Someone keyed our car while it was parked in our driveway. One morning, I woke to find Claire's garden destroyed. Her roses had been uprooted, vegetables trampled, herbs torn from their planters and scattered across the lawn. The security camera had been carefully avoided, suggesting this was not random vandalism but targeted intimidation. I found her kneeling among the ruined plants, soil staining her hands as she gently gathered what could be salvaged. "Claire," I said, my voice breaking, "this has gone too far. We need to consider moving, starting over somewhere else." She looked up at me, then back at her destroyed garden. For a moment, I thought I saw grief in her eyes. But when she stood and brushed the dirt from her hands, her expression had transformed into something I recognized from the files in our attic, the face of a woman who had made irreversible decisions. "No," she said calmly, "this is exactly what I have been waiting for." She walked past me into the house, pulled out her phone, and made a call I could not hear. When she emerged again, she was carrying a sealed envelope. "What is that?" I asked. "Phase 2, she replied. "They have made every mistake I needed them to make. Now they face consequences." Claire moved with purpose now, no longer concerned with maintaining her cover. The pretense of the quiet gardener had served its purpose. Now she operated with the efficiency I imagined had characterized her former career. "In intelligence work," she explained as she organized files into precise categories. "The gathering phase is long and patient. The action phase is swift and absolute." She had compiled a comprehensive dossier on the HOA leadership, financial records showing clear embezzlement patterns, audio recordings of explicit threats and admission of fraudulent practices, documentation of falsified election results, evidence of assault, identity verification showing several enforcers had misrepresented their credentials and backgrounds. "The problem with corruption in small systems," Claire noted, "is that the perpetrators believe they are too insignificant to face real consequences. They think no one important is watching." She made 3 identical copies of the complete file. Each was professionally bound with indexed sections, executive summaries, and supporting evidence meticulously organized. The attention to detail was extraordinary, not a civilian's angry complaint, but a professional intelligence briefing. The first copy she sent by certified mail to the state attorney general's office, specifically the division handling financial crimes and public corruption. The second went to the FBI field office responsible for our region. The third, she explained, would be delivered personally. "There is a town hall meeting tomorrow night," she said. "The mayor and county commissioners will be present to discuss community development. Gerald and the board will be there to protect their interests." She did not elaborate further, but I understood that timing would be critical. The next evening, Claire dressed with unusual care, modest business attire that would blend in at a civic meeting. She carried a small shoulder bag containing the third dossier. "Do you want me to come with you?" I offered. She shook her head. "For this part, I need to move alone." She hesitated, then added something rare for her reassurance. "It will be fine. Systems exist to handle exactly this kind of corruption. We just needed to package it correctly." She left quietly, driving her own car rather than walking as she normally would have. I waited at home, fighting anxiety as hours passed. Just before midnight, she returned, calm, but with an energy I had not seen before. "It is done," she said simply. "Now we wait." We did not wait long. At 6:45 the next morning, 3 unmarked sedans and a county sheriff's vehicle parked near the HOA clubhouse. Men and women in suits entered the building carrying briefcases and evidence collection kits. By noon, news vans had arrived, setting up cameras at the community entrance. Claire watched the footage on her laptop, occasionally nodding as if confirming expected developments. The local afternoon news led with the story. "Breaking news from Oakwood Estates, where state investigators have executed search warrants related to allegations of financial fraud and misappropriation of homeowner association funds. Sources tell us that evidence points to over $2 million in community funds diverted to private accounts over the past 18 months. The camera showed boxes of documents being carried from the clubhouse to waiting vehicles, computer equipment, financial records. Then, most dramatically, footage of Gerald Hoffman being escorted from his home in handcuffs, still wearing jogging clothes, his face a mask of indignant disbelief. By evening, the full scope of the investigation had emerged. 7 board members and 3 external contractors faced charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy to assault. The enforcers were being investigated for impersonating law enforcement officers. The HOA accounts had been frozen pending forensic audit. The next day's newspaper featured the headline, "Suburban Scheme Exposed, HOA Used as Criminal Enterprise." The article detailed how an anonymous whistleblower had provided authorities with extraordinarily detailed evidence of systematic corruption and intimidation tactics. It quoted the district attorney calling the evidence professional grade and irrefutable. Perhaps most satisfying was the sidebar interview with our elderly veteran neighbor, now identified as a retired judge, who described being assaulted for displaying an American flag. "I knew something was wrong with the whole operation," he stated. "I just could not prove it until now." Neighbors who had avoided us for weeks suddenly found reasons to walk past our house, waving tentatively. Several left apologetic notes in our mailbox. One brave soul knocked on our door with a homemade casserole and stumbling words of admiration for our courage in standing up to them. Claire accepted these gestures with polite detachment. She neither confirmed nor denied any involvement in the investigation. When reporters sought interviews with the family at the center of the HOA controversy, she declined all requests. "But you brought them down," I said one evening as we watched another news segment about the expanding investigation. "Do you not want people to know what you accomplished?" She shook her head, sipping her tea with the same calm she had always possessed. This was never about recognition. It was about restoring balance. I looked at the woman I had married, seeing her with new eyes, not just as my quiet, garden-loving wife, but as someone who had dedicated her life to fighting corruption from the shadows. "Besides," she added with the faintest smile, "the best operations are the ones where no one ever knows exactly what happened." Spring arrived with remarkable symbolism. As crocuses pushed through the soil of Claire's rebuilt garden, new life also emerged in our community. The court-appointed receiver managing the HOA dissolution organized a neighborhood-wide meeting to determine next steps. The clubhouse, once Gerald's fortress, now hosted genuinely democratic discussions about community governance. "We propose a simplified structure," the court representative explained, "required by state law for shared infrastructure maintenance, but with transparent accounting, term limits, and resident oversight committees." The changes were approved unanimously. Monthly dues were reduced by 60% once the fraudulent contracts were canceled. A volunteer landscape committee formed to maintain common areas until professional services could be properly vetted. Our neighbors, once frightened into conformity or complicity, now stopped by regularly. Some brought plants to help restore Claire's garden. Others offered hesitant apologies. "We should have questioned more," our next-door neighbor admitted, helping Claire plant new rose bushes. "We just assumed they had the authority they claimed." Claire accepted these overtures with grace, but maintained her essential privacy. She declined invitations to join the transition committee despite numerous requests. When a local newspaper wanted to profile her as the homeowner who fought back, she politely refused. "I am not comfortable with attention," she explained to the persistent reporter. "I just want a garden in peace." One morning, a sleek government sedan parked briefly in front of our house. A woman in a tailored suit emerged, spoke with Claire for exactly 7 minutes on our porch, then departed with a formal handshake. Claire never explained who she was, and I knew better than to ask. Life settled into a new rhythm. The enforcers, disappeared overnight. Gerald and several board members now faced years of legal proceedings. The investigation had expanded to include 3 other HOAs in neighboring counties where similar fraud patterns had emerged. Claire returned to her garden with renewed dedication. The destroyed plants became an opportunity to redesign the space, more native species, smarter water usage, a small meditation area beneath the maple tree. She seemed at peace in a way I had not observed before. Most surprising was her decision to offer self-defense classes to neighborhood women. Twice weekly, a small group gathered on our lawn, learning basic techniques for personal protection and situational awareness. Claire taught with quiet authority, demonstrating movements with practiced precision. "You never know when you might need to protect yourself," she would tell them. "The most important weapon is your mind. Stay calm, assess the situation, then act decisively." The women clearly adored her, this quiet gardener who had somehow developed such skills. They did not know her background, but they sensed her competence and gained confidence from her teaching. One evening, as summer approached, we sat together on the porch swing, a ritual restored. The neighborhood felt different now. Children played freely in front yards. Residents chatted across driveways. Gardens bloomed in previously forbidden colors. The rigid conformity had been replaced by a genuine community. "Do you miss it?" I asked carefully. "The work you used to do?" Claire considered the question, watching a hummingbird hover near her newly planted salvia. "Sometimes," she admitted. "The purpose, the clarity, but not the cost." She did not elaborate on what that cost had been, and I did not press further. The mail arrived, and among the usual envelopes was an official-looking letter addressed to Claire. She opened it carefully, read its contents, then passed it to me without comment. It was an invitation from the State Housing Authority, requesting her consultation on new regulatory frameworks for homeowners associations. "Your unique perspective and evident expertise would be invaluable in establishing more transparent and accountable governance standards," it read. "Are you going to accept?" I asked. Claire folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. "No," she said simply. "Once was enough." She poured herself another cup of tea and settled back into the swing. I understood then what she had never needed to explain, that the quiet life we had built was not her compromise or her hiding place. It was her choice, her victory, the peace she had earned. When the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her flourishing garden, Claire reached for my hand. We watched the changing light transform ordinary flowers into something magical. "I have been thinking," she said, "about planting fruit trees next spring, something that will grow for decades." I squeezed her hand, understanding the significance of planning so far ahead, of putting down deeper roots. "I think that sounds perfect." A car slowed as it passed our house, not an enforcer but a neighbor waving in friendly greeting. Claire waved back, a small gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Yes," she said softly, more to herself than to me. "This is exactly where I want to be."